In this video, we'll cover the act of hovering. While hovering, you can be in ground effect or out of ground effect. In a ground effect hover, the blades are pushing the air towards the ground. In turn, the air deflects from the ground, pushing back up towards the helicopter, providing a pocket of air that acts as a cushion. An out of ground effect hover requires significantly more power due to the rotor system supporting the entire weight of the helicopter. Because of this, it may be very difficult or even impossible to hover an out of ground effect if you're too heavy, at very high altitudes, or in extreme hot or cold temperatures due to the air being too dense or too thin. While hovering is the most difficult skill to master in any helicopter in DCS world, once you understand the physics of what's occurring, that'll be the foundation of how you handle the controls. Now if we slow things down a bit, we can see the blades of the Huey are rotating counterclockwise. This produces a clockwise torque on the airframe. This torque pushes the nose of the aircraft to the right and the tail to the left, both in a clockwise manner. You can see this occur when the collective is increased and no corrective action is taken. And the torque effects are even greater the more collective you add in. To counter this, the cyclic must be pulled back and to the left a few inches, as well as applying left pedal to counter the torque. By doing this, the goal is to apply enough left pedal to equal the amount of torque the blades are inducing on the body of the aircraft. This equilibrium results in a steady and smooth hover. And as soon as the controls are set back to neutral, if you can master this balancing act, you'll find yourself becoming very proficient at hovering. Now let's get into some real-time hovering. I've added the virtual controls indicator at the top left so you can see the actions I'm making on the cyclic, collective, and the rudder. As we increase the collective, you want to pay attention to your torque gauge. This gauge will be used to determine when you go airborne. It will differ depending on the weight, so on your first hover, you want to pay attention to the amount of torque it takes to get the Huey in a hover. The second gauge to keep an eye on as you go airborne is the turn and slip indicator. Now that we're in a nice stable hover by applying cyclic back and left, along with left pedal, you can take a peek at the turn and slip indicator. The top arch of the gauge of the turn and slip indicator signifies how much spin the aircraft is undergoing in a clockwise or counterclockwise motion. While you don't want to spend too much time focusing on this gauge, a quick glance can help you determine if you're holding a steady heading on the fly. To make movements in any direction while in a hover, first make sure the area is clear around you. Then slowly and gently push the cyclic in the direction you want to go. In this case, we'll go forward. The trick to stop this forward movement is to gently pull back on the cyclic, and just before you come to a stop, push it forward back to a hover position. To move in a lateral direction left, ease the cyclic to the left and slowly decrease your left pedal input. You can see during this movement my pedals are turned to a neutral position. To stop, ease the cyclic to the right and increase your left pedal input to compensate for the torque and gravity required to stop. Again, you want to stop pushing the cyclic right just before the helicopter begins to laterally move right. A lateral right movement requires more left pedal input. To stop, move the cyclic to the left and add additional left pedal input. As you practice hovering and moving in various directions, it's important to remember you want to think ahead of what the helicopter is doing. If you notice you're starting to pitch backwards, while the helicopter may be stationary for a few seconds at this backwards pitch, you have to anticipate the delayed backwards movements. Then correct by applying the appropriate opposite force and release just before the helicopter stops. Making small corrective actions is key to stable hovering. As we move left, right cyclic action is taken, and then back left before the Huey has a chance to continue its rightward movement. The same corrective action is applied to rightward movement. Apply left cyclic and then right before the Huey begins moving left from your left corrective action. It's most important not to overcorrect on the cyclic, or you'll find yourself fighting the pendulum effect, which is very difficult to diffuse. You can see how long it takes me to stabilize after initiating a series of intentional overcorrections. To conduct a left pedal turn, simply increase your left pedal input while keeping an eye on the ground to help you stay stationary while conducting the turn. Notice the dial at the top of the turn and slip indicator pushed to the left, signifying a counterclockwise movement. While it may be obvious I'm making a counterclockwise rotation, this indicator can become extremely useful in low visibility conditions. It's also important to keep an eye on your vertical speed indicator to ensure you're not increasing or decreasing altitude. Once you feel comfortable moving around a bit in a hover, try setting up a few cones in the mission editor in a V-shape to use for practicing. I'll head over to some I've set up to show you how you can use them. Since the majority of hovering relies on focusing outside the aircraft, giving yourself something to focus on helps you determine what the helicopter is doing without you having to look at your gauges. By having them in a V shape, it provides depth perception to gauge forward and aft movement, and by setting them side to side, it'll let you quickly determine lateral movement. Now we'll get into the most difficult type of hover, an out-of-ground effect hover. As we increase collective to go straight up, more left pedals required to counter the additional torque and the loss of the in-ground effect. A higher altitude hover like this is difficult as you lose up-close visual references that would typically help you make small corrections to stay steady. Because of this, you'll now have to rely a bit more on your gauges, such as your turn and slip indicator, your vertical speed indicator, and your artificial horizon globe. But in addition, you also want to pick two reference points to focus on while hovering at this altitude, something out in front of you and something right below you through the window near the pilot's feet. The reference point out in front will help you keep a steady heading, and the point below you will help you ensure you're not moving in any one direction. This concludes the hovering tutorial. If you find yourself continuing to have difficulties, try adjusting your cyclic sensitivity. I personally prefer my sensitivity a bit higher, which allows me to make quick and sudden small corrections to keep everything stable. However, you may prefer a lower sensitivity. Once you find that sensitivity rate that you're comfortable with, practice with it and don't change it.